Sweetie, you were eyeing me like in a bad way? Because
Well,
I thought you had good hair.
Yeah, no, I was a little scared. Well, I was just saying to John, we're the only people here who are not going to be talking about long-form journalism or super iconic stories. We were not in a war zone. We have not saved any boys' lives.
Not
but we write,
anywhere.
we can write about a red lipstick that really will make people go out and buy it. So just to acknowledge that from the start, and my shameless plug here for Women's Health, but I would like to tell Chris Jones that I've been trying to get Penelope Cruz on the cover, and I would love for you to take another stab. So. $100 Oh, done. Okay. So, we decided to frame this as a sort of typical women, how people view women's magazines.
You might
stories.
realize
10 ways to do that. It's like BuzzFeed thinks they created the list, but women's magazines have been doing it forever. Our first point is, you have to give a shit.
Give a shit. You have to. I mean, it seems like it's just makeup. It's not just makeup. It's not, guys. You have to give a shit.
It seems ridiculous, but when we were working at Allure together and we were doing Best of Beauty, which if any women in the audience know, it's sort of the magazine's seminal story, and it's 183 product reviews. And
explain how long it takes.
It's a 6-month process, and it's all makeup, and you want to kill yourself. My husband's in the room, and he, we had 50 products in the shower, but whatever.
And I've also had to risk my life. Sorry. Also had to risk my life because I've used oil-based cleansers in the bath. They've been very slippery. There's been a lot of dry hair situations that have I've had to have haircuts because of
ugly days.
Gets ugly.
But I guess the point we're making is, okay, we're not writing about something, again, super iconic. This is kind of mundane stuff. But if you don't care and you're just like, oh, it's another red lipstick, you have to read 180. You have to write and read 183 of these. So you have to find some way to talk about it, and you have to actually care.
And you have to actually try them, and you have to actually notice the discrepancies between them all, because you know what? It's a niche publication, and there are makeup artists out there that will kill you if you get it wrong. These girls know,
Yeah.
So, one of our examples here is the...
Yes, we were not in the war zone, but we've had several wars about...
Burgundy Wars of 2010.
We've literally gotten in 2 fights, and one was about Burgundy and one was about taupe.
Because
What?
Burgundy, it has it's a wine, right? So you think it's a berry, it's a wine, but it's not. It has a brown base, okay?
Right, so it's warm toned, it's not cool toned, and these are the arguments we had at Allure, till 10 p.m. at night. But the editor-in-chief of Allure, Linda Wells, actually started her career at the New York Times. And she started Allure with the concept of people can write about beauty from a very, as investigative as one can get about beauty. And so,
and it's true, we actually,
we got into a lot of crazy conversations just to make sure we're being 100% legit.
And science stuff, we have to talk to a lot of, it's come a long way, baby, from Vaseline and it's you have to learn about all sorts of ingredients and things. I spent the last week very glamorously talking to several podiatrists, I had a medical pedicure. I discussed with a foot model. There's a lot of different issues that go into foot issues, and I've talked to the most glamorous people, on the field, and I've learned a lot.
You got to care. There comes the point where you're crying in your office because you can't finish the story, and then you're like, oh, it's mascara.
And that's the best part about being in this industry is no one dies at the end of the day.
No one dies.
That's why I love it.
Better. So. Moving on, find the spin. A lot of this, yes, I do work at Women's Health now, but I have an Allure Anonymous sort of thing. It's, I say to my staff always, well, at Allure, it's when I was in band camp, back in band camp, I say it all the time. So a lot of this is about Allure just because that's where Meirav and I work together. But, find the spin. Obviously, when you're working in a service publication, there are going to be stories you have to do every year. Summer comes around, it's time for the frizzy hair story, it's time for the oily skin story. You have to do it. You would be remiss not to do it, but how are you going to do it in a different way? We don't want to, again, hear the 10 ways. Speaking of the 10 ways, 10 ways to get rid of oily skin.
Amateur move.
Yeah, so, this was an example, a body heat, of a story that Meirav wrote, and we were like, how can we get into how you treat summer skin in a way that's more than just
Right. So I was who has to deal with this shit? Okay, well, there's the chef at Butter in New York City who's getting a steam facial over the fryer all day. There's like a woman who was there's the professional volleyball player, a whale watcher, who was like out at sea, like getting baked in the sun. There was actually somebody else, I don't know. But the point is, these were all people that like had to deal with really hot weather, and it was a different way of tackling the story, because people like, as everybody else has said, a story. They want a person to follow. They want a little story arc. They want to know about like horseback rider and like how she gets the sunburn. They want to know about the foot model getting tan lines on her feet and it ruining her summer's work.
Yeah, one of the people was a Miami Dolphins cheerleader, which we found out through this, that the Miami Dolphins cheerleaders are often stalked and hence cannot use their last names in any stories. So we were like, oh crap, now this doesn't seem real. You know, it's just Susie, the Miami Dolphins cheerleader.
She was totally real. She was so real. She was the one that told us about putting antiperspirant on your forehead so that your sweat doesn't dribble into your face and ruin your makeup. You didn't know that.
Yeah. Anyway, how this relates back to the writer-editor relationship.
It does, because look, if I gave you 10 ways, you'd be like, I hate you.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on. First thought, worst thought. I mean, this is sort of, some of you guys have touched on this, and this is different, in a different way, but the first thing you think of is probably the cliche, and you're like, oh my God, I'm genius. I thought of a new way to describe
this. If your sentence completes itself, you're not doing it right.
Yeah.
It's because you've heard it before, it's been said 1,000 times, like you have to try harder.
Yeah, I mean, here's our example of
But wait, can we talk about jargon for a second?
Yeah.
Because in the beauty industry, it's like jargon central, and it's like that in any sort of niche sort of area. And especially with science-y stories, it's really easy to get caught up when you're writing something and you're trying to impart some sort of like fancy specialized knowledge to somebody, to get caught up in their language and to feel like you're like so insider, you can like throw those words around. But you're totally screwing yourself, because your reader, unless you're explaining it as you go along, is now being distanced from you. And I feel like that's why magazine stories read differently than press releases.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And like when Amy was saying dynamite in a small package, like for me, I remember this from 5 years of editing Best of Beauty. I remember this one entry that Meirav wrote because she described the bristles of these brushes as though they had come from Pegasus. And so you're reading, you're on, like the tools section of Best of Beauty is the last section, and you're like, oh my God, there's 10 brushes. They all won because they're soft. And they all feel good.
Not like this one.
But like this one is from Pegasus. So it was just, it always just stood out in my mind as a way to describe a product that, you wouldn't have automatically thought of. So be clever.
Be clever.
It's not all about you, and this
service, it's not. It is. I mean, look, there's some places where people are like, oh, we must have your voice and you must tell your story. That's not not women's service, no. No one wants to hear your story. No one wants to know your struggle, unless it's a very specific, like an essay or whatever.
Or somehow your story is going to teach them a greater truth that applies to your story topic. I just had a writer, we have this celebrity coming up on the cover, and we assigned it to a very particular writer because we thought she was somewhat similar to the celebrity, and we thought she could get her to open up and actually say something interesting. And she clearly thought she was that similar to the celebrity because she, no, I can't. So she thought, she came back to us and said, oh, I know, like, let me do the story as my life was actually on the same trajectory as this celebrity. Like, I went to this school, she went to that school. I did this, she did this. I did that, she did that. Except, like, I didn't end up becoming a household name. And I was like, no,
that's not the story.
No one cares. So, we have used, I hear you guys talking about how celebrity stories can go so wrong, and it's so true. We had Eva Mendes on our April issue, and she just would not say a word. Her new thing is she wants to be demure and not sexy, even though, like, that's...
Well, she just had a baby, so
she
can't
had a
be
baby,
sexy,
whatever. Yeah. She only wanted to wear slacks on the cover. Anyway,
4 months ago.
This is, we get the story back, and it's just like deadly. It's like the cliched way to start a celebrity profile in a women's magazine. Like, Eva Mendes is even more gorgeous in person, or like and I just was like, this is so bad. So in that instance, we did go back to the writer and say, like, okay, you do have to insert yourself now, because the woman would not say anything interesting. So like the only interesting thing is for you to then go back and talk about how Ryan Gosling's your movie star husband, and you're pissed that she's stolen from you. So we had to use her to make something that was like readable. Moving on. Anyway, so back to like not inserting yourself too much. However,
Right.
Meirav wrote a story for us. It was all about adult friendships in the age of
that.
social.
Not like that.
Adult friendships in the age of social media and how.
There was a study, and it was saying how we have all these friends and we collect all these friends on social media, and it looks like we have all these friends, but in reality, everyone's like sad and crying at home by themselves with like 2 friends. So we had to make that into
nobody wants to admit that, so we had to have Meirav basically admit how many friends she has online and then how many friends she has in real life.
The numbers gone up so much if you Google it. It's like not those numbers anymore. I have way more friends
now. But essentially we went back and forth because we decided, she needed to insert herself in the story a little bit to further the idea.
A little bit, just in the intro. It was like, just to make it more relatable, because otherwise it's like, well, that's not me, you know what I mean? But in reality, it ended up being a pretty good story about that all sorts of girls kept coming up to me afterwards and saying like, your story really made me like connect with my friends more. And it was like,
all right.
That's actually nice.
You did change a life.
I did that. That was
Yeah.
nice. And then my essay, I had a little mini essay, and it was about having like a friend fling. You don't have to be friends with everybody that you see just for the night, just because they're nice. You can just like hang out with them for that brunch, or like
Yeah. It was a friendship fling.
It was a friendship fling. You don't have to make it any more than that. Just enjoy your company when you're together.
And then say farewell.
And say farewell.
Oh, here we go.
She's beautiful, isn't she? Okay, forget all of that. New classics, credits, captions. How-to info.
This is our weakest slide, okay? We tried to cut it out, but we had to have 10 ways.
This
So I
was
think we can just move on.
Because we said 10, and we ended up with 9.
Yeah, I think we should move on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Moving on.
Yeah. Okay, anyway, packaging is everything. So my parents are in the audience. It's kind of embarrassing to talk about the penis package, but here we go. This is a story Meirav wrote for us at Women's Health.
About dicks.
And, obviously this can be considered not the most exciting topic or the most exciting topic, but...
It's like the pedicure story. Like, sometimes, I know you interviewed a lot of urologists and experts like that.
Yeah.
And,
we didn't really have an outline for the story. We were kind of just like, we want to do a package on his package.
The actions in the balls, okay? That we know. So we had to add a ball box.
We did. So, essentially what we're saying here about packaging is everything is that Meirav went out, interviewed a ton of people, sent us back like a giant list of every fact ever, found and not found about penises, and we then, took it from there and boxed it out into what we thought was a very compelling and funny package, And
I actually ended up being a little controversial as well. This uncut truth about circumcision, which this is a really genius piece of art. It's a bald guy in a turtleneck. So this, I think you used it online as a slideshow.
Yeah.
And it went, there are people called intactivists. And they are activists that would like to remain intact, but their parents have taken that right away from them, and they're angry about it, and they took out their anger on me on Twitter, as well as saying that I was pushing the Jewish agenda, because I'm Jewish.
Yeah, so this gets back to the writer-editor thing. It's like people think that Meirav just went out and wrote this without anyone at the magazine like okaying it. It's like, no, she just was like
my personal opinion,
producing the story. But obviously
beautiful just the way it is.
Yeah. We do a lot of packages at Women's Health, and we want it to be entertaining, but also we want people to be able to retain some of the information. And had we just thrown up like 25 facts, no one would have it would just be deadly. So there you go.
It's like not everything's a sexy story. It's like it's not always like an unsolved murder or like a
Yeah. So how can we make this
exactly? It's still got to know.
All right, we're ready. Never say there's not a sidebar idea. This just happened to me the other day. A writer was like, I was like, we need a sidebar. And she's like, I'm sorry, there's just not an organic sidebar that can work for this. And it's like, that's kind of the stupidest thing to say to an editor because there's always a sidebar.
There's always a sidebar.
And we use our example from Allure of how we took the concept of how to put a flower in your hair and blew that out into 6 pages.
All me.
Which essentially we could have summed it up in one
I could have
sentence.
done like, just put it near your head and then clip it.
But
6 pages.
6 pages, but we have to, we have to come out with a magazine.
I've got the introduction. We're going back to San Francisco. It's Bohemian times. The girls are wearing flowers in their hair. Now,
history.
We're telling you, where to buy them, and at all price points. You want to be rich, you can get a rich one. You can get a poor one. Do you want a real flower? Do you want a fake flower? These are decisions
let's go
you
through
have
the
to
points about when
and
a real is good and fake is good.
There's pluses and minuses to both. We also found out that if you don't want to really make that decision, if you're a fence sitter on the real faux flower situation, you can go to a professional florist and he will spray the real flower, with some kind of chemical magic solution that will make it last longer. So you've got 3 options.
You can have it both ways.
No.
What else? We had more. It didn't end there.
Size,
placement,
celebrity,
placement, depending on your hair.
Inspiration,
So, basically there's always more to say, no matter how mundane and
But it's interesting, and
pedestrian
because
the
you know
topic
what,
seems.
none of these things, and that's the thing about sidebars, none of the sidebars, they're fascinating, they're interesting, they're not strong enough they're not a story, And so it's all the questions you would have if you read a story that was literally flowers in the hair are really cool, they were on the runway as you put them in, and here's where you put them in. You're not really getting the full effect. You would have questions. You would have questions like, what kind of flower?
Where do I put it?
You read it and you have questions. You're like, where do I get this flower? Is it a real flower or a fake flower? You really have to, and here, they're all answered.
Yeah. Just so you guys know, we actually do reports in women's health, on serious health topics. But, we're focusing here on beauty
on ones
stories.
we've worked together, and we're very shallow people.
Yes. Okay, next. There will be edits. This is, there will be blood, but there will be edits.
I don't know
I'm always amazed on a story like this when someone gets super pissed that you changed their...
And again, this is our industry. So in a women's magazine type situation, each publication has its own specific voice. It's not your voice, it's their voice. So you can't get all hung up when they start moving things around unless it's a personal essay or some sort of thing where they're asking for your opinion.
Yes, and in some cases we want that and we want the voice, but in some cases it's this is a story that belongs to women's health, and why does it belong there? Why is it in Allure? It has to fit that publication.
And it goes back to trusting the editor, because you might, what if I was like, I hate Ooh La La, what a terrible, it's happened, not on this story, but stuff that I've written has ended up online with the worst clickbait headlines, and there's nothing you can do about it, you know what I mean? So,
the other thing that can happen, obviously, this is a story about French manicures we don't hate, because I had an agenda against French manicures for years, but all of a sudden, some cute ones came out on the runway, so we did it. But we had asked Meirav for some perspective and history of French manicures. Are they actually French?
And
blah,
I did
blah,
all
blah.
this reporting, and I had a really fascinating timeline from the beginning of time. And there was Egyptians, and they were rubbing their nails with stuff, and there was French people.
Yeah.
They were dripping red juice on it and buffing.
So, but once we got that, and we were we've got a 2-page spread. It's essentially just about these 5 looks. That had to go. We had to cut that out. So sometimes it will happen that your editor has asked for it, and then they cut it.
I did not cry. Because I trust my editor. She knows what the magazine is looking for. It's you might. Okay, I'm a writer. I'm a writer too. I'm a creative writer as well. But that's not what this is. You know what I mean? So you gotta work. You're working for a magazine. You're working for a magazine and you have to do what they want. So you can't get too hung up on changes. In this particular case, and a lot of writers do, they take it really personally, but you can't, because you don't know what else is in the issue. You don't know if they've repeated that bit of information 2 issues ago. You don't know why it's not working, and unless you really want to talk about it every time, just let it go. Let it go. Let it go.
Okay, moving on to the next
Moving
one.
on.
Oh, be flexible. So, this is not a story, this is just an image from Women's Health, but we, a lot of times I feel like in these kind of service stories, we'll set out and we'll be like, oh, we're going to frame it this way, and it's going to be set up this way, and these are going to be the sidebars, and blah, blah, blah. And as the writer's going on and they're doing the interviews, they find out that, like, actually the more interesting thing was what so-and-so told me, like, as a side note. Yeah.
Like the balls.
But a lot of times you'll get the story back, and it's exactly as you asked for it, but it's so deadly boring. And you ask the writer, and they're like, oh, well, I did exactly what you wanted. That it's sort of the case of if you discover along the way that it's not working in the way that your editor assigned it to you, don't just go rogue and do it your own way, but like give them a call, send them an email, like talk about it then. Don't wait till you turn it in and it's terrible. You know,
it's the give
you gotta
shit.
go.
It's like meshed in with the give a shit, because like you can't just be like, here's my C work, like I just filled out your outline just the way you wanted. If it's not working, but don't be like it's not working. You have to be like, here's how we can do this, and then at least give an
you don't want to
option
just you want to
Don't
come.
ever come to your editor with a problem as a writer. That is like the last thing they want to hear. You come to them with a solution, and then they can tell you it was a dumb one, and they'll tell you a better one.
Exactly. Like, you know, what often happens is the writer will be like, oh, it's not working because they said this and it didn't fit this way. And then the editor will see it in a different way and say, oh, well, actually, that makes better sense. And let's do a box on that, or let's frame it this way. And it's the more interesting story. And I mean, with the service story, I mean, the goal is always, let's try to say something that we haven't heard 5 bajillion times. So sometimes it is those like random throwaway comments the source will say that will lead you down another path.
The rabbit hole we all talk of.
Yes. And finally, what makes you the go-to?
Well, I'm timely.
Timely.
I feel I might be a little voicey. I'm a pretty good researcher, and I am not a whiner when it comes to revises.
You know, the go-to editor, respectful of the writer's time. I mean, there was once a story at Allure that ran 3 years after it was assigned, and I think that was really annoying for the writer to 3 years later be asked like a series of questions about leg makeovers, but we ran it. So, you know, you want to, when you go back to the writer, you assume this is the only thing that they're doing, but no, they have other assignments, so try to be respectful. Be specific. You know, it doesn't help to just say better, which is a comment, you know.
And we've seen say better, we've seen must we, we've seen all sorts of things. But if you're not going to give constructive criticism, it's like, at least put me in a direction. Tell me what, be decisive. I feel like as the editor, I'm working for you. Like, I need to know what you want. So you need to be clear and you need to be decisive. And that's a really, really important thing, because a lot of editors, especially in magazines, there's a lot of editors on top of this editor. You will be working with an editor, but there will be 2 or 3, sometimes 4 top editors, and they will all have an opinion.
You don't want to just get that manuscript back with everyone's commentary on it and no direction what to do, because it's like people having a conversation on a piece of paper.
It's scary because I've been both an editor on staff. I've been every kind of editor at Allure. Like I was like a web editor, a senior editor, whatever. Then I was a deputy editor. Like anything about like editing and writing, like I can from all the different ways. But like if you aren't decisive, it's so obvious when this stuff comes. If you don't know what you're saying, and the writer doesn't know where to go. So it's really, really important.
You basically have to take all of your top editors.
You can't be afraid of your top editors, guys. Don't be afraid.
Yeah, you have to take all that information and then distill it down for the writer so they know, like, okay, here's what, you didn't like this, but here's the direction I can go in. And then, you know, finally, the go-to editor sends gifts, which not really, but our point is...
Actually, you've given me some good gifts over the years.
Yeah. I mean, the point is, do give a little bit of praise.
The biggest gift that you can give a writer is, like, a positive piece of feedback, because all you get day in and day out is just about why it sucks. Like there's that first line of like, this is really good, everyone loves it, but, and then it's just a litany
like just a few
of just like
changes.
How you suck and like everything you did was wrong. And like a lot of people don't take the time to be like, dude, that was a really good story, and like, didn't it come out really great? And you know, oh, I really liked what you did with X, Y, and Z. It's just, in a magazine environment sometimes, it sort of sometimes happens when you're a freelancer and you're like alone in your apartment and it's winter and like you haven't put on pants in like 4 days. Like you just want someone to say that what you've been doing is worth it. You know what I mean?
So I shed the love on Meirav, hence why we're here together.
Yeah.
And with that, we're done.
And with that.
So questions.
The graphics is a really great presentation because it is. I'm long been a believer that your service journalism needs to be at the same level as your feature journalism if you want to keep, especially with the type of magazines that we work for in City Regional. The graphics are so much fun. There's a lot of the examples you gave there. How closely do you work with the art department?
I mean, I work extremely closely as a freelancer.
It varies from publication to publication. There's been some places where they literally want you to have no contact with the art department, which is weird. I'm not going to say that that's normal, but like some places that I've worked have been like, no, like this is the creative director's job and like whatever. Often when I was at In Style Weddings, we would storyboard it out first. So I would know, like, I want this image here, I would do, like, and I would know how many pages it was and exactly what the word count would be if I was assigning it out to somebody, because we had talked to the art department first. A lot of people do it in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm very involved, more so now that I'm the editor, but you know, I sit there, I have ideas, the art department meets first and they kind of discuss it, and then we meet together and I might have had a thought and then we go back and forth, and I always think it turns out so much better when you involve both the edit staff and the art staff, because sometimes the art staff comes up with something that like looks beautiful and is artistic but has nothing to do with the story and makes absolutely no sense. So yeah, we're, I think we at Women's Health, at least, we try to be very collaborative on that.
So working in this niche publication, what is it that you do to increase your audience? As far as social media and things like that, how much does that play into your guys' role?
Well, I mean, Women's Health is not a niche publication. Allure was more niche in the sense that it's essentially a beauty magazine.
But Women's Health is known for its fitness coverage and known for its, like, you know.
Yes, I mean, we're sort of in a movement now
side.
to make Women's Health more of a lifestyle publication. So, you know, we're always fighting against the name Women's Health, because you look at it and you think it's all about health and fitness, but actually if you open it up, it's essentially a lifestyle magazine covering every possible topic. And you know, we're doing some transitioning of the cover a little bit, where we're trying to use less generic cover lines, you know, hone in on the stories that we do that some of our direct competitors don't do. We always do have a report, you know, this big one coming up about online harassment. We just did one about new fertility treatments where you can test embryos before they're implanted to change things like eye color, but also, you know, a history of breast cancer. So those things are in the magazine, but they weren't necessarily reflected on the cover. You saw, oh, she's in a bikini and it's all about abs, and yes, that's in there, but you know, we have been, I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but we are trying to actually bust out of it being a niche publication and showing that we actually cover this breadth.
Your website's good.
Yeah, I mean, we have a web team of 13 people. We have like major social media at Women's Health, and I was telling some people the other night, you know, we did go down the BuzzFeed hole where we were trying to do super clickbait, and all of our posts were about sex, and originally it worked, and we were, you know, the numbers were boosting and blah, 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 and then eventually our readers sort of turned against it, and they were like, whoa, like we don't want to click on any more of this. So we've kind of gone back to our roots, and like things have gone back through like sort of a wellness lens, and we have a mix of things, you know, and we've been happy to see that, you know, yes, the sex stuff's still performing and weird beauty treatments still perform, but also, you know, news about cancer is like our readers are clicking on that. So social media wasn't really happening so greatly at Allure when we were there. They were a little behind the times, so I can't really answer that.
I mean, having been a web editor I was a web editor in 2000. So that was different than what's happening now. I mean, you still needed to like hard code things, and and like stuff was very static. When I came to Allure, and the other thing that you'll learn is like a lot of these startups and stuff are more, if there's a lot of young people and they're not like stuck in their ways, like you might have more of a useful web presence or you know, social presence. It took Condé Nast and Time and the big publishers a while to catch on. So when I became web editor in 2004 for Allure, it was very basic. I mean, it was like literally almost static. But they've come a long way. Like now they have a huge like product guide and all sorts of things like that. But I think they were taken by surprise by how seriously. I think they thought they could like wait and through, but they're realizing that they have to not just go online and be, you know, in the ether or whatever, like do all sorts of things online and digital and phone and whatever, but they have to do it better, and they have to staff it. That's the thing that they've just learned, because for a while it was like, oh, does that not fit in the magazine? We'll put it online. And it was just kind of like online was the collection. It was like the dustbin of like things that were cut from stories. And they learned quickly. But so it's not like that anymore. Although things like sidebars will reanimate themselves as slideshows and things like that.
Yes, I mean, what we found online, that some of our longer stories in book obviously don't make as much sense on the site, but our site director thinks that the sidebars usually become the thing that's interesting, you know, and they turn them into slideshows. But we definitely have like probably 10 original stories up every day, and then repackage what's been in the magazine in a way that's web friendly and an infographic or some sort of interesting
so great
thing.
about the way that you guys are doing it and how people are finally realizing that it's a different audience. So
yeah, we
the
probably have
magazine is one thing, and the people that read the website are another group. Sometimes it crosses over, but some people like their information delivered a different way. So they do vary now, and I think it's actually been better to have two staffs that talk to each other almost than have like when you're a print editor and you're primarily a print editor and someone's like, oh yeah, and you have these 3 web duties too this week. You're like, it's always the last thing you did. And it ended up being really poor quality for a long time. That was in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to have integration in the sense that you want to represent the
They are
brand in
looking
the
for
same
people
way.
with good ideas, dudes. If you are smart and you know how technology works, because everyone over 30 does not, please tell them. Tell us, we want to know, we want to make money off of it.
Amy, a question for you. As a Mizzou undergraduate, what did you learn here about writer-editor relationships? That's a specific question. Okay. And what would you recommend to make sure that we are teaching the students right now?
Whoa, okay. So my main professor, I found out that John replaced her, Danita Allen, who used to be here, and she had come from, I think she had worked at Meredith. She had started her own magazine, Country America, and she is the professor who sticks out to me of anyone I had, because she had sort of, you know, been doing it in the trenches, and she used a lot of very specific examples from her magazine to make a broader point. So I don't know if that's so much about the writer-editor relationship. Well, I guess it is in the sense that she was sort of the editor and we were the writers. But you know, seeing an actual example of what you're talking about rather than just talking about it in theory, I think always makes it easier to digest. And then I think what you guys are doing with the magazine club is awesome. You know, the magazine club coming to New York, that started the year I was a senior here. There was not nearly as much of an emphasis of go to New York. You know, sometimes it was like, whoa, go to New York, okay, good luck. That's totally changed. I mean, I see that every time you guys come. I think it's been like awesome, and I think, you know, talking to, you know, continuing the relationship with the alums and like seeing what people are doing in the industry and just like having that regular conversation about like what's going on in magazines, like what's the new trend, blah, 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 is the best way for you to then figure out, you know, what you can impart to your students.
Don't you think that it really helps to have both experience as being an editor and a writer?
Yes.
I think that's an important point to make. Because like when you've done both things, you get a sense for what you're asking for. You know, as an editor.
Yes. We had one particular editor at a publication, not to be named, but not the editor-in-chief, but who had never been a writer and was constantly saying, this is no big deal. Oh my God, it's going to take you 5 minutes.
Oh my God, you can do this in your sleep.
Oh, you're just going to poop it out. And you're like, okay. And then like actually it required, like it's an 100-word item, but you have to interview 10 people to get to the bottom of like, does this laser really blast cellulite or whatever it is? But but you know, you want to be legit about it. So it's really hard, I think, to take advice from someone who hasn't done it and doesn't know what it's going to require.
It's like it becomes almost intuitive. Like when you're a writer, like everyone keeps talking about the rabbit hole, right? It's hard to even know at the end of the day what the hell the story is, because you're like, but this. And my inclination is always like, Amy, here's the history of French manicures from the beginning of time until now. Like, do you love it?
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like when you've been an editor, you can more clearly see what the story is in your own mind when you're writing. You know what I mean? And you already know the questions they're going to ask. I write a sentence, and I know she's going to be like, yeah, but for how long do you leave it on the skin? Yeah, but for, it's like I already know all the little nitpicky things that you're going to ask me, so I stick it in there. And that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been an editor first, Try it, and you never know which one you'll like better. They're both really fun.
I have a question more just about women's magazines in general and not necessarily women's health. I've noticed that a lot of magazines targeted towards men, like Esquire and GQ, have a really kind of diverse editorial mix. They have those great style pieces, but then they can write about like the gay community in Russia. And I've noticed that in women's magazines like Glamour, Cosmo, Marie Claire, they are starting to do more in-depth reporting, but it still has that women element to it. I don't think that they would cover that story in one of those magazines just because it doesn't have that women spin on it. Why do you think women's magazines don't focus on like the entire global politics? They just don't have as a diverse of an editorial mix, and I was just wondering
all
your opinion.
magazines do that. That's what my initial answer would be.
What do you
mean? I feel like that's the prevailing culture. Is like everyone just thinks that's like every other magazine you read. That's not a women's magazine. And everyone's allowed to read that stuff. It's not a woman's or a men's topic necessarily.
I mean, my predecessor at Women's Health, when I was the executive editor, her rule was that the story had to apply to 80% of people who were reading the magazine. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, and I think, I know you're not asking about women's health, but here I go with my plug again. I think what we're trying to do is include some of those more bigger issues alongside, yes, we have a beauty story, yes, we have a fashion story, yes, we have a fitness story, but we're also going to do something that we think is zeitgeisty and people are talking about. We don't, unfortunately, I think, have the space to do, a lot of it is space issue, and we have to cover our core topics, and then if we have extra room, we can dive in. But we are actually making a concerted effort this year to blow out topics and do a 10-page story, in our September issue on this particular topic, and that actually does have something to do with LGBT community. But we take the information. I had seen this study, someone sent it to me, that was saying the trans community has had poorer health care for a variety of reasons. I mean, it makes sense when you think about it. But I forwarded it to my health editor, and we were like, we're not going to do an entire 6-page story only about that community because we don't have enough readers that's going to apply to. But how can we take that and still weave it in and broaden it out? So we're still touching on the topics that are happening, but in a way that enough of our readers can come into it and find themselves in it, and then can discover the other topic. I mean, I think women do want to read about it. I think Cosmo's actually doing a great job about becoming smarter and doing stories that people are talking about, and not just 50 ways to do it.
Hi, I had a question about your two relationships and how it's kind of evolved from meeting each other at Allure to where it is now, and how the ups, the downs, the changing jobs, changing publications, and just friendship, I guess, in the magazine world.
Well, that's the thing about shit talking in this industry. Don't do it, because you will see the same people over and over again. And that's one of the reasons that we still work together. Not the shit talking, the part where you see the same people over and over again. You left me to go to Shop, etc.
Yeah, we each left each other at Allure at one point. I mean, there was
for in-style weddings. We've been reunited a few times.
I don't know. Maybe it's an Allure thing. Everyone who worked at Allure together during a certain period of time were all still best friends. We were in the evil makeup trenches together. So we suffered through.
It's brutal.
But
I think
I don't know. It's a very incestuous industry. You see the same people over and over, and wherever you go, they were. I don't. Who was talking about going from Esquire to GQ? Was it you? I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, everywhere I go, like I bring my people who I know are good writers and who I know I can work with and who we've established that relationship and we know how to work together. And so no matter where you go, you kind of bring your people along with you. And
it's nice to have someone in your corner as a writer, you know, and I'm sure it's nice to have someone in your stable as an editor.
Yeah.
You know, when my magazine folded, I was immediately envisioning myself like eating cat food on the street. Like I was immediately like, I couldn't afford, you know, that's it. Yeah. But it was that day I had called you and I was like, and then she was like, oh, you know, my friend's looking for a writer for a story. Well, that was my first gig, right? And I got it that day. Now, that'll happen, and that happens over and over again because these relationships, if you're good and if you are open, opportunities will come up all the time. So if you just are prepared to do the work at any time, they will present themselves. That's one of the things, like you were talking about how things just fell at, like you didn't have a plan and it was just like be a dumbass or whatever. I'm totally like that, like the biggest dumbass. Like everything I've done has been just like, I fell into it. It was not the plan. I didn't even know what jobs there were when I got out of college. I'm a poli-sci major. That's the most useless thing you can study. But like, you just, what was I even saying?
I don't, yeah, I mean.
Oh, the being dumb. It's not just being dumb. It's not just, it falls in your lap because you're prepared. You have to be confident, you have to be prepared, and you have to be good. And you have to be ready, and you have to be able to recognize an opportunity. That's something that a lot of people can't do. And if you are like that, stuff will happen. It will. Like, it just will. You'll think it's like, oh, I just stumbled onto it. It's not. It's you. You did the work.
Yeah,
and
as somebody else said earlier today, like a lot of people just like cannot write a decent story. So like if you find someone who can, and like I mean it's bizarre because you're like, this is not rocket science. Like what I'm writing about is pretty straightforward, but like yet you get.
But that's the thing. Like everyone thinks they're a writer because you learn to write in like 3rd grade. But guess what?
Yeah,
it's not the same thing.
So essentially, you form a relationship and you continue to go back.
Cheers.
Amy, I wonder if you can answer one question about covers. We're seeing a downward trend in newsstand sales. I think all magazines are seeing it, but you're showing a kind of an upward trend at Women's Health, as I understand.
I mean, yeah, we you know, we're suffering as well, but not as much as everyone else. It's terrifying. I get this thing called scan that comes in like a week after the issue's been on sale, and it's the scan of how many are going to be sold, and it's like the most scary figure ever because if it's looking bad, you're just like, oh God.
Can you talk a little bit about what's working on your covers, or have you come up with a kind of a plan actually for, since you've been editor, about shaping covers and seeing what's working on newsstand and what's not?
Yeah, I mean that's part of what we're sort of experimenting right now with, you know, we have some direct competitors that we felt like kind of totally cribbed what Women's Health was doing on the cover. We had very specific cover lines, and they started using them. They started styling the covers the same way. All the lines looked the same. You were staring at the newsstand. There was a lot of fatigue because everything just sounded the same. So we are trying a strategy, again, where we're using more personality and voice in the cover lines, where we're trying, you know, we shot Kate Mara in a more fashion-y way, and she's in a different pose, you know. I mean, we're trying different things to see what might resonate. I hope that like doing it in a more interesting way with personality does resonate. It's going to be very sad if it comes back and it's like, no, just go back to the cliche cover line because that's what people actually buy. So, you know, that's what we're trying to, you know, Rodale, which owns Women's Health, is actually a small-ish publisher compared to Condé Nast or Hearst, but because it is a small family-owned company, they're sort of like, try anything. It's sort of liberating in the sense that they're like, okay, let's make bold moves, let's just try stuff, and if it fails, then we go back. But so that's what, you know, we're trying to do. We want to be poppy, and you know, we're just trying to look different. We want to differentiate ourselves from the rest.
One last question? Anyone? If not, thank you very much. It's been